So now let's talk about your actual home studio. Now, don't be afraid to use this word, home studio. When people see this word, it sometimes scares them because they think about a very expensive room for recording professional audio. They think of something like this, where you have to have booths and lots of equipment and places for housing soundproofing rooms and stuff like that. You can spend millions of dollars on these sorts of studios. But really, when we talk about home studio, we're not talking about anything this complicated. We're often just talking about something like this. Somebody who has a computer and a laptop already, or a monitor, and they've just purchased a USB microphone and maybe a shock mount to use with their existing computer setup. So really, don't be afraid if you have a very humble home studio, because especially these days, you don't really need much more than the microphone and the computer. So one thing I wanted to mention though, when you get your equipment together, is it's not so much the quality of the equipment itself. That's important, but what you really want to be concerned with is the distance that you put the equipment away from each other. In other words, in a typical arrangement here, you can have electromagnetic interference coming off your devices, and when they get too close, they actually affect each other. Moreover, your laptop or your computer produces sound that will affect the microphone, so it'll pick up the sound of the heat fan, for example, as well as just regular electronics interference from the laptop or even from the speaker power supply itself. So what's important here is that you keep these three things separate from each other. You're going to have to make a configuration, whatever studio you use, whatever configuration you use. The important thing is to make sure these things are not too close to each other. Maybe 1 foot or 2 feet away should be fine. Now, when it comes to actually recording your audio into a microphone, what you really want to be conscious of is how far the microphone is away from the speaker. So I have 3 different frames here, and this one is probably too close. This one probably too far away, and maybe something like this one is probably just right, maybe. But here again, it depends on the room. When you have a person that has a very quiet voice and a person who is not really varying their audio very much, they're just saying the same thing in a very monotonous tone, then you might need to put the microphone like this to position it close to their mouth, just so you can pick up what they're saying. Or on the other hand, if you have a very loud speaker, a very loud person talking into the microphone, then sometimes you do put the mic farther away. One problem that happens in this arrangement is this arrangement will tend to pick up lots of echo from your room, because not only do you have the audio emanating from the speaker's voice, but this arrangement is susceptible to catching lots of other echo from other areas of the room, particularly bouncing off the ceiling and coming back to the mic. So the point is, there really is no perfect arrangement for the microphone. This last slide here is probably going to work for most people, but it really depends on the person and it depends on the equipment you're using. So you want to vary the direction and the distance from the mouth to the microphone that you use when you're recording audio. Just do your own little experiments and see what works best. It has a lot to do with the particulars of the room you're recording in. You can see in this slide here, I've drawn a pretty typical studio arrangement, and you can see we have a nice microphone on the left, and typically you'll have your voice artist stand over here and do some recording. Now, what I wanted to mention here was, again, about the echo problem. What happens is that when you record in this fashion, then the audio is coming out of her mouth and it's going to be bouncing off the studio walls. And when it does that, it of course bounces right back and it gets received by the microphone. So when that happens, you get into this circle where you just keep creating audio, but you keep receiving echoes as well. So this can end up getting a very hollow track as you're recording, and that's not good. So typically the way that people deal with this is to hang acoustic foam all around the studio. These are these big foam sheets, or lots of little foam sheets, and they hang them on the walls to try to avoid this echo effect that we were just talking about. So you can see in this slide here, this is a very, very nice studio, and it appears they've hung some very expensive looking acoustic foam all over the walls. So this would be a very professional home studio. Now often what you'll see as well is some people will just take a room in their house, often a closet, and they'll just buy boxes of acoustic foam and just hang the foam themselves on their own walls. And they'll create kind of a sound room in their house just for recording. Again, this is all in an attempt to minimize the echo and avoid audio interference. Now, another way to accomplish this is to use what's called an audio isolation box. So there are hundreds of different types of these available to buy on the internet, but basically the principle for all of these is pretty common. You have your speaker is going to stand here, and they're going to talk into the microphone, and the acoustic foam will help to dampen the audio as it's coming off of their mouth through the microphone, and it gets trapped by this wall of acoustic foam, and so it doesn't actually go into your room or spread to other areas of your recording area. And the same thing with this device here. It's the same principle. You're just speaking into the microphone, but the acoustic foam will help to dampen the effects of the sound, so it won't actually leave the box. And so these can work pretty good. I use one myself to dampen audio, or rather to dampen the echo effect that happens in my room. So there again, that's just another way to attempt to overcome this echo effect that happens in your typical room when you're recording. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of money on this stuff. There are a lot of do-it-yourself websites and web pages out there where they show people making their own studio equipment. You can see this guy built his own isolation box out of some sort of possible mattress foam here and some sort of plastic container. So again, this is the one from the store, and this is one that you can build yourself here. So that's an interesting isolation box. In this slide here, you can see this is some store-bought acoustic foam. This looks like some fairly expensive acoustic foam. Generally with acoustic foam, the thicker it is, the more you pay per piece. But if you've seen that movie Hustle and Flow, you might remember they used these McDonald's cup holder cartons for their home studio, which I doubt that actually works very well, but some people have reported hanging these on their wall in their studio and claiming that it works pretty good. A lot of people will just put blankets or mattresses on the wall as well to try to dampen the echo. Here's another do-it-yourself item here. You can see this guy actually created his own shock mount using rubber bands and some plastic PVC piping. So that's a pretty creative shock mount design. And again, it'll pretty much accomplish the same goal as the store-bought version. So that guy's getting pretty creative too. But whatever studio arrangement you decide to make, you really can get quite far with just a minimal set of 3 components. Really just a condenser mic, a pop filter, and whatever you have to do to make your room quiet with no echo. If you could just do these 3 things, then you're actually doing a lot better than most of the people recording audio on the internet. Recall that you can get a condenser mic, the Go Mic, on Amazon for $35. Filters are very cheap, maybe 5 to 10 will get you a pop filter. And the room itself, that's really up to you, and it really depends on the current acoustics in your room right now. But with just a little creativity, it's very possible to get a high quality recording while spending very little money.